This is Lehigh Valley Political Pulse. I'm Tom Shortell. We're closing in on the May 20th primary, and local campaigns are entering the home stretch. I'm joined by political scientist Chris Borick to discuss how municipal candidates are trying to connect with constituents. We've spent a lot of time talking about how presidential and congressional candidates communicate with voters. Municipal candidates don't have the same resources. How do effective candidates make themselves heard in the Lehigh Valley?
It's a good question, Tom, and a challenge for local officials, local candidates to find paths to reach voters in ways that might not be the same as a national candidate, a statewide candidate. This is retail politics. This is still an opportunity to go out and meet your constituents door to door at events, in places that you could be face to face. That's not available to elected officials on the higher level as much. They can do it, and there's some events, but just the economies of scale don't allow that to happen. So if you're running for mayor in most places, or you're running for council, and at even the county level, you could still get out and meet a lot of voters, especially in primaries. You have voter list. You know who the voters are. You could target them, and you can go out pretty aggressively to meet and reach those voters in more direct ways than you could at higher levels.
Is that as easy as it used to be? Like you call it retail politics. Like a lot of like brick and mortar retailers are hurting in this era. But I feel like we've also lost a lot of the civic engagement that you used to see decades ago. So is it as straightforward as it used to be to find those places of community, in a sense, almost communion, to come together and talk about important things in your community?
Yeah, there's not as many venues where community organizations get together that you might be able to go out and speak and make your pitch. Some of those groups have gone away. Some of those places no longer exist. That doesn't mean that they're not there. There's still community organizations that you could say, hey, I'd like to come out and talk to you. There's still party structures that you could use also. And to a degree, you talk about retail, like the decline of brick and mortar stores that you don't go to. We go online, and so have, by the way, candidates at local levels go online just like everybody else. But they do have the ability to still also reach out in person. I'll just give examples. I live over in Nazareth on Main Street, and during campaigns, people knock on my door. They still come to my doors. I mean, we saw that in the presidential race, not presidential candidates, but people campaigning for them. But candidates, I had last race candidates for local state offices come to my door to come and speak with me. That's attainable, right? For these types of scales that we're dealing with at the local level, and I think it should not be undervalued because those personal contacts still matter.
I don't know if you've done polling at the local level in these municipal races yet, but in general, is there any polling to suggest what people care about in their local government at this point? Not necessarily for like Lehigh Valley, but like the American public. Like, are there issues that people are hot about now or statewide? If you have it for Lehigh Valley, I don't
Yeah,
know if you
it
have.
it, it have. We haven't polled the primary races. I don't think we ever polled municipal primaries. It's just a hard group and to get at, and the size of the electorate. But I'll put it this way, Tom. We see in American politics right now some varying dynamics going on. One is the nationalization of local politics, where national level issues creep down into local politics. So if we're talking of national issues like immigration or big kind of macro policies, economic policies, those do encroach upon local races, and elected officials at the local level, candidates will have to talk about those now more in ways than they have before, even if they don't have as immediate of an impact in their power that they would get in office. That's the reality. And we've seen this. It's hard to distance yourself from national politics, especially if you're in a primary election that's partisan by its very nature. That being said, local issues, local topics still dominate lots of these races. So if you're in a municipality Is it an infrastructure issue? So often you hear that. Talk to elected officials. There are people upset about parking, people upset about road conditions, people upset about access to parks and public spaces, loss of public spaces, right? Things that we talk about, and so all politics is local, right? It is. It's how you feel it. So those local candidates have to be attentive to that. At the same time, right now, as I talked about, those nationalized pressures are also encroaching on them and making, I think, their challenge as candidates even harder right now.
I'm glad you brought that up because we've been seeing examples of that nationalizing of the local or localizing these national, and that matters. Tara Zrinski, for example, a Northampton County executive candidate, has been attending protests about potential cuts to Medicaid. The Republican candidates for Lehigh County executive have made a point to discuss ICE policy and how that and the Lehigh County jail. Uh, is that wise given how local officials have really limited control over these federal matters? Like, yes, it will impact them, and there might be some stink made over some of these things, but it's largely out of their hands.
Yeah, it's a bit of it's strategic in terms of energizing your primary audiences. Let's think about this. Who shows up in primary elections at the municipal level? These are some of the most engaged voters, the most regular voters, and in the parties, some of the most partisan voters. They feel passionately about being a Republican or a Democrat. And therefore, if you're trying to appeal to them right now and their mind is on what's happening at the national level and what's happening in D.C. with major issues, like you said, with immigration or Medicaid cuts, you want to tap into that. So I see some value for the candidates that you mentioned bringing that up because the audiences that they're pitching to are probably thinking about that, and you want to have a connection there. It does get a little risky, Tom, when you start thinking in the general election, when you get to that point, and that you're going to be tagged, right, or tied. So let's say you're a Republican candidate right now, and you're tying yourself in a primary to the president and some of the president's policies. And let's say in this fall, maybe some of those policies aren't all that popular. You might have to take on the baggage in your candidacy and open yourself up for those. So there's a tight rope to walk there. If I was a local candidate, and especially in a primary, I might want to see what I can mine from those issues, but I wouldn't want to throw myself in too far because you might lose control.
Part of the reason I suspect why we're seeing this nationalization of politics, or even at these local levels, is the health of local media. Like, we've been seeing newspapers and other media institutions shrinking for decades. Uh, how hard is it for voters to be informed on these local matters? Because, I mean, it's not like CNN or Fox News or what have you is going to come down and report on like the water authority or why your school taxes are going up.
I think it's a major challenge for both candidates and for the public, and a major concern in American democracy. I'll put it right on the line, Tom. The challenges that local media have had in sustaining their work and reaching audiences is, as you said, pretty impactful in our democracy, and it's harder. I mean, so if you're an individual right now and you're trying to get information on candidates or get information, you can go to the candidate sites, right? They have information. The parties have that. How much is available through local media? Luckily, in Lehigh Valley, we have folks like you and existing media outlets that are still there, but challenged, right? Challenged to cover, given the size of the organizations, everything that needs to be covered. And so I think there are gaps. I think people that study this would point out gaps. Across areas, it could be much worse, right? We see areas, the so-called deserts, if you will, with local media that make these efforts by voters that want to find out all the more challenging.
Has that changed the incentive for politicians to engage with local media? And I'm not trying to call it anyone out here, and by and large, this cycle, that hasn't been a problem that I've encountered yet. But in general, has that changed the calculus for candidates about how available they're going to make themselves to people who might ask them hard questions.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think it's from candidates' perspective, if they realize, if they know things might not be covered, it allows them to spin it in ways that they're not gonna be called on, right? They could avoid it, as you said, maybe, "Okay, well, I'm not gonna put myself out there if I'm gonna get grilled on this, and I'll just spin it the way I want through my audiences." But often they're thinking, "Well, look, if no one's gonna cover this, maybe I have more room, more latitude to frame it in ways that aren't always accurate, that might serve their interest." And I think that's one of the big problems with electoral politics and the challenges of declining media on the local level is that there's just so much that's not covered, or there's the resources to cover that are more limited, that these candidates can play fast and loose. And use the other means that they have right now, social media, ways to reach out, and to voters that bypass traditional media.
Is it just me, or has the political temperature dropped a bit this cycle? And I know that's kind of standard for you go from a national to a local one, but even compared to 2 years ago, we were seeing some unusually partisan campaigns in the school districts. We had a particularly ugly race for Northampton County District Attorney. Has everyone taken a deep breath this year?
Yeah, I think that's fair to a degree, Tom. I think we see this in some of our polling. Right, people are tired; they're still exhausted from last year, and we come into the new administration that's been going at breakneck speed, right, and kind of drawing different reviews from segments of the population. But that's taxing, right? That's taxing. Change is taxing. Uncertainty is taxing. And you could respond in different ways to that. You can kind of double down and come out as firebrand, but there's a point where the public just gets tired of firebrand and wants things to revert a little bit to a more calm and traditional way. So that doesn't mean that those underlying pressures aren't there. I do think when you see some of the debates right now and the candidates, especially internally in the parties, there's I think a bit of a step back from what we may have seen in the fall.
And I know, as you pointed out, the primaries is when you see the most engaged people. It's the people who their party is part of their identity. Um, but are you getting a sense of burnout at all? Are people pulling back even at these local levels, where in past years they might have been more engaged, uh, more willing to participate in local democracy?
Yeah, I'm unclear. It's unclear to me, Tom, how this is going to manifest in turnout this spring. We know, right, historically, these uh, off year, to use the term, odd number year elections, primaries are low turnout, some of the lowest turnout races we see. So the standard isn't really high to begin with, right? Will the kind of broader environment now, the pressures, the weariness, even impact that more this year? I don't think so. I think we'll probably be closer to where we are historically normal, and there is at least a little bit of a possibility. I think on the Democratic side right now, with some of the energy, the anger, the kind of desire for difference, to even pop numbers up a slight bit in that area. I don't think we're going to see dramatic changes either way, um, but and that might be as big a part of the low benchmark that we start with in these. And those people still show up, right? Super voters are super voters for a reason. They keep coming back over and over again. That's in their DNA, right? They're going to show up. The folks on the margin will be interesting to look at.
That's interesting because I was thinking we might see, yes, for Democrats, because they tend to be a little madder, have a little more agita at the moment. For Republicans, they appeared to kind of crack the code on mail-in ballots last time around, and I was curious to see if that will provide the Republican turnout with a bit of a boost.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think, and it could be. I mean, we saw last fall that a percentage of Republicans using that method increase. In primary elections, again, it's also the dynamic. It's some of the messaging about, mail ballots might be different, right? If I'm a
Sure.
Republican candidate, and we saw that in the general election last year, kind of build up confidence among Republicans to use it. In a primary, I'm all in, right? Any marginal group that you can get to vote that might not otherwise, you want to try to leverage. And so mail ballots are one avenue for that. And so I would expect that at least you'd see that slight upward trend continue within Republican ranks this spring.
That's Muhlenberg College political scientist Chris Borick. This has been Lehigh Valley Political Pulse. I'm Tom Shortell.